Sarah Cooper. Since I've known him, which has been a long time, he's been talking about giving his last lecture. You're invited to listen to his last lecture, which is entitled, if I can remember it, How to Measure the Success of Your Life.
Thank you, Veronica. Well, thank you. Thanks all of you for coming today, and thanks for Psych Club for sponsoring this. I was afraid when they gave us this big room, there'd only be 6 people here, but y'all came out, so that's great. Well, I read this survey where they asked college students what they wanted to get out of college, and the number one thing, as you might imagine, is they wanted to earn more money when they got out. Way, way, way down on the list was developing a meaningful philosophy of life, and I think that's too bad, because I think that's really what it was intended for. It was intended to be like a period at the beginning of your adult life when you could decide what you wanted to get out of it. So what I'm going to do today is present a particular philosophy of life that I talk about in my evolutionary psych class. I call it the evolutionary philosophy of life. I'm not saying that you should adopt it, but it might help you in developing your own philosophy of life is the idea. So the title of the talk today is How to Measure the Success of Your Life, and I've got life underlined. The reason I got life underlined is I want to take very seriously the notion of what does it mean to be a form of life? I want to discuss what the purpose of life is. If we know what the purpose of life is, well, then we can determine what it means to be a successful life form. A successful life form would be one that's really, really good at accomplishing its purpose. So that's the idea. So let's sketch out the brief history, anyway, of life on Earth. Okay. So the Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago or so, and it was pretty much covered in ocean. Now, in the atmosphere of the Earth at that time, there would have been carbon dioxide and methane and ammonia and water vapor. I bet some of you are familiar, have heard of the Urey-Miller experiment, where what they did was they reproduced the chemical conditions on Earth and then put an electric spark through the mixture, kind of like a lightning bolt on Earth. And what appeared in the mixture was amino acids that are the protein molecules that serve as the basis of life. And so the presumption is that in the ocean at that time, 4.6 billion years ago, there were some of these amino acids. Now, amino acids have the property that they can form covalent bonds with other amino acids to form chains. So in the ocean, these amino acids were floating around, and they were forming chains and breaking apart, some of them long and some of them short. And this went on for like a billion years with these chemicals coming together and breaking apart. But one day, 3.5 billion years ago or so, a replicator molecule was produced. A molecule that was able to make copies of itself. And this, arguably, is the most important event to have occurred in the history of Earth, because this is the event that eventually led to life. All living things derive from this original replicating molecule. Now, we don't know exactly how it was able to make copies. We can imagine, say, like some elements like this, A, B, and C, say those are structures, chemical structures. Maybe like is able to attract like. So A attracts A, B attracts B, and C attracts C. So that's how it made the new chain. But there are other possibilities as well. Maybe like A is positively charged, B is negatively charged, and C is positively charged. A might attract D, B attracts E, C attracts F, and then D attracts A, E attracts B, and F attracts C, so that would be another way of making the copy. But we don't know how it actually made the copies, but I wanted you to take it very literally. It was able to make copies of itself. Now, the idea is that this was the first form of life. This is the first thing that we would say, this is alive. And all subsequent forms of life on the Earth derive from this original replicating molecule. Now, you know what it means to have a relative? What it means to have a relative is that you share a common descendant with somebody. And so what this means is that since we share relatives, well, that means that every single other life form on the Earth is, in fact, a distant cousin of yours. Every dog, every cat, every blade of grass, your athlete's foot fungus, all are distant cousins of you. And this gives me a spirit of kinship with the other organisms on Earth. Sometimes I go up to the oak tree in my front yard and I say, so, you going to the family reunion? Yeah, I heard the plankton are going to bring a keg. So that's right, we're all related ultimately because we all derive from this replicating molecule. Now, here's the thing. If you want to insert God into the story that we're about to tell, this would be the best place to do it. Nobody knows how that replicating molecule got in the ocean. It could have been that just by chance it happened to come together and form a replicating molecule, but it's also possible God planted the replicating molecule in the ocean. It's possible it was an alien science experiment that planted that replicating molecule in the ocean. We'll never know. But here's the thing. Once you have that replicating molecule in the ocean, well, then what's going to happen is it's going to make copies very, very quickly, right? Because every copy it makes is also going to be able to make copies. So each one of those is going to be able to make copies. And so very, very quickly, the building blocks, the chemicals that make up this replicating molecule, they would have to be competed for in the ocean. Now, here's the thing. When the replicating molecule copies, the copying of the replicator molecule is unlikely to be perfect. In a copying process, there are going to be mistakes that made. And these mistakes, when they're in biology, they're called mutations. So maybe instead of, for example, ABC here, it happened to be ADC, okay? So there was a mistake in the copying. Now, most of the time, of course, if there's a mistake in the copying, what will result is a replicator that can't make replicas anymore, right? It just won't be able to copy. But now and then, there will be a mistake that actually makes the replicator better at making copies than it was. The idea is that, for example, a mutation might occur that makes the replicating molecule longer, okay? And so we have this long replicating molecule in the same chemical soup as a bunch of shorter ones. And this long replicating molecule has kind of a tail, and so it's whipping around, and it's hitting these shorter molecules, and then breaking them apart to make its own, use their building blocks to make a copy of itself. So essentially, now we have our first predator, right? Now realize this is not a predator that's thinking, oh, I'm going to go kill that other thing and take its stuff. No, we're still talking about microscopically small strands of chemicals in the ocean. It's just now some are going to be better at copying than others. Now, there are essentially three ways that a cell can become a better copier. It could make copies faster. It could make more stable copies that don't break apart so much. Or it could make copies with fewer errors. But what's going to happen is some of these life forms are going to be more successful than others. They're going to be able to make copies faster. We would expect them to monopolize the building blocks in the ocean, and then over time, the more successful life forms are going to increase in the population. So the idea is this replicating molecule is like now building a survival machine to help it keep it from being taken over by the predators, and then allow it to actually make copies of its genes. And these survival machines became more and more and more elaborate. Now, the modern replicating molecule is the DNA. That's what made all of us. And eventually, this process that I talked about, this process of mutation and more successful life forms making more copies of their genes, essentially that process eventually led to animals. Now, think about your own body. Your whole body is composed of cells. Skin cells, blood cells, muscle cells, bone cells, liver cells. Cells, 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 cells. How many cells? Turns out our best estimate of the number of cells in your body is about 40 trillion. 40 trillion cells, a number so vast we can't even begin to imagine it. And inside each of those cells is a nucleus. And inside each of those nuclei is what? The DNA, the replicating molecule itself. The genes hit the mother lode when they made you, didn't they? They got to make 40 trillion copies. And what you're supposed to do is, you're supposed to go out and find a mate and start producing offspring, so you'll make more and more and more of these copies, 40 trillion every time you pump out another kid. All right, and that's what it's all about, okay? That is the purpose of life. The life forms that make the most copies of their genes, they're the most successful life forms. That's the idea. Now, I didn't realize any of this until I got to graduate school. What I thought about evolution before I got to graduate school was, okay, well, there's natural selection and one animal changes into another. But no, what I didn't get from all this was what the purpose of it all was. So I read The Selfish Gene when I was in graduate school, and I learned about Hamilton's rule, and I realized, no, the whole purpose of all of this thing is making copies of these microscopically small strands of chemicals. That is the purpose of our life. And I didn't like that, okay? I really didn't like that because that didn't seem to be a very exalted purpose for one's life. It's rather like a bad Twilight Zone episode. Why, Mr. Jones, you don't understand the situation at all. The genes aren't here to make copies of you. What's actually going on is you're a robot. The genes built to make copies of them. And I felt like I was covered in filth when I realized that's what was going on. Best example I can give from literature is, art, I guess, is a Toy Story. You seen Toy Story? There's a point in Toy Story where Buzz Lightyear realizes he is not, in fact, a space ranger, but is, in fact, a child's plaything. Well, this is kind of like that, but way worse. You see, being a child's plaything, there's like a point to that. You're making a little kid happy. But there's no point to making copies of these genes. They're not sentient. They don't even know this is going on. So the point of my life was really pointless, I thought. But I thought about it for a while, and I decided, hey, I got to make my peace with this. Really, the only objective measure for the success of a life form is the number of genes they copy. Most successful palm tree, the one that copies the most genes. Most successful dog, one that copies the most genes. Most successful athlete, foot fungus, the one that copies the most genes. And the most successful human being, the one that copies the most genes. So how can I be successful and copy the most genes? Well, I looked around, and it seemed to me that the most successful people, in the United States anyway, were the Amish, actually. They copy the most genes. Now, Amish don't believe in birth control, and they need like a lot of kids to do manual farm labor. So it's really common to have double digits kids if you're Amish, 10 to 12 kids, and then each of them has 10 to 12 kids. Now, the environment in which we evolved, it would have been, replacement level would be 4 grandchildren, and if you were really successful, maybe you would have had 6 grandchildren. But think of this, if I joined the Amish, I could have maybe 12 children, and each of them has 12 children. I could have 144 grandchildren. Wow, I'd be really successful if I did that. So I looked into it. It's actually not that hard to join the Amish. It's really easier than I thought it would be, actually. So what you have to do is you have to live with them for a year, which I was going to live with them permanently, so of course I live with them for a year. And then you have to learn Pennsylvania Dutch, but, I want to talk to them, so of course I'm going to learn Pennsylvania Dutch. And then after a year, they vote on you, and then you're in. And so you also have to be married if you're an adult and you're Amish, so they'd give me a wife, and I'd start pumping out the genes, was the idea. But then I thought, I don't know if you saw that movie or heard about that movie. It's a movie called Delivery Man with Vince Vaughn. And it's about this guy who's a sperm donor, has 250 kids. Now, the movie itself is fictional, but it's actually based on a real guy. There was this guy in Montreal, a sperm donor in Montreal, who actually had 250 kids through sperm donations. I don't think it was legal what he was doing, but that's what actually happened. And when I hear about this, now I get really excited about the situation. It's 250 kids, and what if each of them they're in the Amish, so they'll probably have 2 kids on average, but that would be 500 grandchildren. Then I'd be really successful. But then I started thinking, well, what if I became the director of a sperm bank? And then what I'd do is I'd spend every waking minute and every dime I had figuring out how to get around the security system at the sperm bank and depositing my own sperm. I mean, potentially I could have thousands of offspring before they caught me. And then I'd be really successful. Plato, Shakespeare, Beethoven, nothing compared to me. I'd be the greatest Homo sapiens who's ever lived because I would have copied the most genes. And so that was my plan. And at the time, when somebody would call me on the phone and ask me, hey, dude, what you doing? I would always say, just trying to maximize my differential reproductive success, man. Same old, same old. Because I thought, yeah, that's what all of life is directed towards. It's directed towards making copies of these genes. So now I wanted to become the director of the sperm bank, and I have to admit, I didn't know really what kind of background you needed to become the director of the sperm bank. Maybe you need a medical background or a business background. It turns out your best bet is they have these health administration programs, hospital administrator programs, and so if you get a master's in health administration, that probably would be the best training for the sperm bank. So I looked into those programs, and boy, I wasn't too enthused about them. When I saw the sort of classes I'd have to take, that looked really boring. And I started to think more about actually spending my life as a director of a sperm bank. I mean, that didn't seem like a very fun job to me, actually. And, do I really want to spend the brief time I have on Earth and all my money trying to get around the security system at a sperm bank? And if I actually was successful, would that actually make me better than Beethoven? I took a long look in the mirror one day, and I realized I was living my life for my genes. I was like a codependent. I decided I'm not going to live my life for my genes anymore. I'm going to live my life for me. Now, you're sitting there thinking, now, wait a second. Your genes are part of you, and just a few minutes ago, you said that the whole purpose of life was making copies of these genes, that you were actually designed for that process. So what do you mean living your life for your genes versus living your life for you? Okay. Well, let me try to give you an example to try and illustrate what I mean by living your life for you rather than living your life for your genes. Let's say, this is mostly for the guys in the crowd, but it'll allow the females to decide how well they understand male psychology. We're going to give the guys an option of two separate tasks that they could do. Option one is you could contribute some sperm at a sperm bank. So you can go to the sperm bank, they say it'll take about half an hour. They got a room with some magazines, and you'll look at the magazines and masturbate into a cup, and they'll take your semen sample, and then they're going to use that to inseminate 2 females who you will never meet, and they guarantee that you'll have 2 offspring from this that'll be raised to maturity. So that's option one. Okay. Option two, this is the second option you can choose. Extremely attractive woman comes up to you and says, hi, I find you very attractive, and I'd like to spend the next 24 hours being your personal pleasure provider. We will do anything you want for as long as you want. Now, it might sound good, but here's the bad part. You haven't heard the bad part yet. She's using several different forms of birth control, and so the odds you're actually going to have any offspring or copy any genes from this encounter are pretty much 0. Now, let's take this option that I've given you from the genes perspective. The genes are thinking, oh, come on, you got to go to the sperm bank. In half an hour, you get 2 offspring. 80 trillion copies of your genes. You've hit the jackpot. Most males spend their whole lives and work their whole lives to raise 2 kids to maturity. You get to have 2 kids that you don't have to support at all for just half an hour's work. You got to do that. You got to do that. So let's see, how many males in the class, if given the choice of contributing to the sperm bank or having 24 hours with the personal pleasure provider, are going to go with the sperm bank? Nobody. Okay, well, now you realize the situation here. The situation is this. Even though we are robots that have been designed to pass along our genes, the thing about us is the genes didn't design us to care about making copies of our genes. If the genes had designed us to care about that goal, well, then going to the sperm bank would be more appealing than having the personal pleasure provider. But reality is we have not been set up to care about the goal of passing along our genes. What we've set up, there are certain things that are rewarded, things that would lead you to pass along your genes. And that's what we care about. We care about getting the rewards. And yes, you could get the rewards by actually having offspring and actually reproducing. That's true. But it's also possible to get the rewards without reproducing. And you know what? That's okay too. So, I'm a robot. The genes created to make copies of them. But what kind of robot do I want to be? Do I want to be the robot that copied the most genes? The most obedient robot? Maybe the genes will make me employee of the month? No, I don't want to be the robot that copied the most genes. I want to be the robot who figured out what was going on and then spent the whole time he was here activating the reward circuits in his brain as much as he could. I want to be the happiest robot, the happiest robot. So I changed my goals from wanting to copy my genes to being happy. And the nice thing is that I think if you think about us being robots, you can actually make some predictions about what sorts of things would increase our happiness. Part of the brain that's involved with happiness is called the dopamine reward system. And there are kind of 2 pathways in the dopamine reward system. One leads from the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, to the nucleus accumbens here. That's the mesolimbic pathway. And then there's another that goes from the VTA to the prefrontal cortex and then back to the nucleus accumbens, and that's the mesocortical pathway. So these are the pathways in your brain that are associated with happiness or joy. And so when you're not really unhappy or happy, they're going to be at kind of their spontaneous rate of firing. And then when you're happy, they're going to fire more vigorously than normal, and when you're unhappy, they're going to fire less vigorously than normal. Now, the question is, this is how the reward system works. If we understand what sorts of things would cause the reward system to activate, we can actually engineer our lives to be happier. Well, let me ask you a question here. They've done surveys where they've asked people, what would make you happy? If you had more of something, what would you need more of to make you a happier person? And the interesting thing is, whatever country they do this in and whatever time period they do this in, the same thing comes up over and over again. I bet you must have an inkling of what this thing is. If I want to be happy, I need some more money. That's right. Sometimes people your age say sex, but money is the actual right answer there. That's right. Yes, that's right. Everybody knows that may be the one thing that unites all of humanity. If we had more money, we would be happier people. But here's the thing. They've done studies of people. Like if you look at the people in the United States, we're about 40% wealthier in real terms now than we were in 1974. But if you look at life satisfaction surveys, people don't actually report being happier now than they were then. Life satisfaction is the same. And that's not idiosyncratic to the United States. They've done the same thing in Japan. They looked at life satisfaction right after World War II as compared to now, and the average Japanese person is 3 times wealthier now than they were after World War II, and yet the ratings of life satisfaction are the same. So we got kind of a puzzle here. Everybody's convinced that having more money would make them happier. But when they actually get more money, they don't actually report being happier. So what is going on with that? I want to talk about a theory that explains, it's a theory of what would activate the dopamine reward system of the brain. And so I want to talk about that theory and lay out its applications. But the guys who came up with this theory are not psychologists, they're biologists, and they're adopting a very evolutionary perspective. They're asking, how would you set up the dopamine reward system if you wanted an animal to survive and pass along its genes? Let's imagine in the distant past two separate groups of animals, each of which has their dopamine reward system wired up in a different way. Let's imagine the first group of animals, the charismatic, nice animals are the first group of animals. Here's what they're like. Their reward system is set up such that they gather enough food for the day and they make sure they have enough shelter and some water. And then, after they've done those things, they just have fun the rest of the day and play and have a good time. So their reward system is set up like that. They feel rewarded when they get all the food, and then they can go and do other things. Let's imagine a second group of animals, considerably less charismatic than the first group. Their dopamine reward systems are set up such that, when they find some food, they're happy about it, and they take it back to where they live. But they're not happy about it for very long. Their system's set up so that happiness fades really quickly. And they say, well, I got a lot of stuff here, but no, it's not enough. I need more stuff. And so they go out and they get more stuff, and they keep getting more and more and more stuff because they're never happy with what they have for very long. Well, now let's imagine a famine came where there wasn't any food, and unfortunately, the charismatic animals that only gathered enough food as they needed and then played the rest of the day, they all died. And we were left to descend from the non-charismatic animals that were never satisfied with what they had for very long, and we inherited their dopamine reward system. So that's pretty depressing, isn't it? What that means is you're never going to be happy with what you get for very long. And in that, it explains why we think money will make us happy, but then it doesn't. The idea is that it's in an animal's best interest to constantly strive to improve their material situation. It can't be too rich from the gene's perspective. And so the dopamine reward system has been set up so that when you see a gain in your material success, like find some food if you're an animal, or get a raise at work if you're a human, you'll get a boost in your happiness. But after a while, it's going to fade, and you won't be happier anymore. Sure, those of you who've had jobs know what this is like. First day, every month you get a raise. Wow, I got a lot more money. Second month, a lot of money. Third month, fourth month, I need more money, okay? And that's going to be the way it is your whole life. You're never going to be satisfied with your salary for very long because your reward system has been set up to not be satisfied. Essentially, here is why people think money will make them happier. It's getting the raise that makes you happy. It's not really how much money you have in the bank that makes you happy. It's that you're showing progress. And so happiness and progress are intimately connected with one another. Imagine, say, two men, a rich man who makes a lot of money at his job and a poor man who doesn't make much money at his. Now, let's say one day the poor man, but not the rich man, the poor man is told immediately, you have a 25% raise in your salary. Now, even with the raise, of course, the rich man made more money that day than the poor man did. But it's the poor man who's going home happy that night because he has shown progress. So it's really not the amount of money you have in the bank, is what I'm saying. It's whether you've shown progress. Groundhog Day. Anybody seen that movie, Groundhog Day? Yeah, quite a few of you have. That's good. If you had to, when you go in to pitch your movie idea to the studio exec, he says, tell me your movie idea, 20 words or less. If we had to do Groundhog Day in 20 words or less, we'd say, I think, guy experiences the same day over and over again. There, I did it in 9 words. So that's essentially the essence of the movie. Now, Andrew Sullivan, he's a popular blogger you may have heard. He thinks that if there was one work of art from the 20th century that people 1,000 years from now would find interesting, he thought it would be Groundhog Day. And in 2005, they did a survey of clergymen, and they asked them, have you ever done a sermon on a non-religious movie or television show? And for the ones who said they had, they asked them, okay, what non-religious movie or television show have you done your sermon on? And by far, I mean, double the votes of the next closest one was Groundhog Day. So a lot of people regard Groundhog Day as a very important work of art. The story of Groundhog Day is there's this obnoxious weatherman. He's been sent to cover a groundhog festival at a little town in Pennsylvania. And that night there's a snowstorm, so he has to spend the night in the town after the festival. But he wakes up the next morning, and everything is exactly the same as it was the day before. It's still Groundhog Day. Everybody still acts the same. He has the same encounters. Nobody else appears to know this is going on, but he experiences the same day over and over again. And he tests the limits of this. He commits petty crimes and things to see what will happen, and he gets thrown in jail, and he finds out even if he goes and thrown in jail, he wakes up the next day in his bed, and so he realizes there are no consequences. The most important line in the movie, because it explains what the movie is really about, comes about a third of the way in. So he's figured out what's going on. He's at a bowling alley with a couple of buddies, and he says the following: what would you do if you were stuck in one place and everything was exactly the same and nothing you did mattered? And the guy he's with says, that pretty much sums it up for me. Well, it's played for laughs in the movie, but the thing is, that pretty much sums it up for all of us. I mean, one day to the next is really not that different. Not as extreme as for the fellow in the movie, really, but not that different either. One day to the next, we're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And so the question that the movie is asking and attempting to answer is, okay, what should you do to find a satisfying life under those circumstances? How can you be satisfied with your life when every day is exactly the same and nothing you do matters? Now, the first thing he does is what a lot of us might do. He indulges in a lot of pleasures that you can do. So he eats like a whole table full of desserts. He learns how to steal some money that he can use to buy like a fancy car. He learns some information about a woman one day that he can use to get her to have sex with him the next day. And so he does these things. And after a while, he gets bored with it. And none of these things sound like they'd be appealing to him anymore. And because he can't get any happiness out of life anymore, he decides to commit suicide. But he can't even do that. Every time he commits suicide, he wakes up in the same bed again the next day. So not knowing what else to do, he decides he's going to show progress. He's going to decide he's going to make himself a better person. So he learns how to play the piano. He learns how to do ice sculpture. He starts reading books, and he works on his character flaws. And when he does this, that's when it ends, because he's realized that's what you should do when every day is exactly the same and nothing you do matters. You need to show progress, and in that you can live a satisfying life. What you need to do if you want to live a happy life is you need to have things that you can point to. Something that shows that, yes, I am a better person this month than I was last month. Yes, I'm a better person this year than I was last year. And in doing this, this is going to lead to a sense of satisfaction with your life. Now, I want to also talk about what sort of events might make someone happy. Nice thing about considering yourself a robot who's been created to pass along its genes is, well, if we think about that, we can probably think about the kind of life events that we could set up to make us a happier person. So, what I'm going to go through is the sorts of events that we would predict would make someone happy. What I want you to do is, I want you to imagine how you would feel, by which I mean the literal sensations that your body would experience if you experienced each of these events. And if you are good at imagining, well, then you will be a happier person by the time I am done. And surely you must have very bad genes if you wouldn't enjoy that. So, helps me to close my eyes when I do this, but this is America. You can do whatever you want. So, if you wanted to design a robot to survive and pass along its genes, what sorts of things would you want to reward? Having a cold drink when you're very thirsty, eating something you've been craving when you're very hungry, being someplace warm and safe and dry when it's storming outside, seeing an increase in your status, like winning an award or getting a raise at work or graduating from college, spending time with an attractive member of the opposite sex, and falling in love, and getting married, and having sex, and seeing your first child born, and seeing your children grow, and learn the things they're supposed to learn, and be accepted by other people, and seeing your children get married, and playing with your grandchildren. And if you wish to live a happy life, you should attempt to have some of those experiences as part of it. So how do we measure the success of somebody's life? Who is the most successful person? Maybe the most successful person is the wealthiest person. Maybe it's the wisest or most intelligent person. Maybe it's the best-looking person. Perhaps the appropriate metric for the success of your life is how many people love you, or maybe how many people you love. None of the above, I would say. The most successful person is the happiest person. There's only one way to live an unsuccessful life, and that is to live an unhappy one. And now, when my friend calls me on the phone and asks me, "Hey dude, what you doing?" what I tell him is, "Just trying to maximize the activation level of my dopamine reward system, dude. Same old, same old." And that's the lecture.